Russia will say, yes, you can have sovereignty provided we can have influence and you don't have influence from the West, e.g. Belarus and Georgia. And that is the way Russia will then work. It will try and erode the independence of Ukraine. This is part of Putinism. Now, it's whether America, Trump America, really cares a fig about Ukrainian sovereignty. And I think that that is really open to question, and that is now one of the big questions. Now,
is it in Ukraine's interest to sign this deal? I mean, you can understand why Donald Trump would want access to Ukrainian mineral resources. If you're Volodymyr Zelensky, do you see it as, okay, we're giving up some of our natural resources, but in return we'll have American contractors on the ground in Ukraine, and that improves our security long term?
I think things are pretty desperate in Ukraine. From what I can see, is that coming up to the third anniversary of the war, they really could not contemplate another year of war, particularly in human resources, in material. Of course, they're holding the line. And it is quite extraordinary that Russia is not making enough gains and doesn't particularly want at this time. And this may be a clue why Putin may tolerate this, because he needs an operational pause. They need to regroup. They need to repair whatever they can of the damage to the Russian economy, which is enormous. And there is a view out of Moscow inspired, I suspect, out on X, just as we're speaking. I've been looking at it in the past hour. We've achieved our war aims. So I think that you're going to get a Panmunjom out of this. You're going to get a DMZ, as it were. You're going to get 1953 in 2025. And I'm referring to Korea, of course, where you'll have a frozen armistice. I don't hold out any prospects, if we come to that, of it lasting anything like as long as the frozen armistice in Korea, because I think either way, this, whatever's on the table at the moment, we're not seeing a conclusion to this war. We're seeing a pause at best.
I mean, that's the key point in many respects. And there's this discussion about, well, okay, if you had a DMZ, if you needed peacekeeping troops on the ground, who would they be? Would they be European troops? Would they be British? Would they be French? Would they be American? Probably not. And therefore, Robert, long term, are we heading for further conflict between Russia and European democracies? Is this heading towards an all-out war between Russia and the European democracies?
I don't think you're going to see any international or Western European troops on the ground inside Ukraine whatsoever. And I think that is a red line. And I think that there may be a reassurance and a monitoring, and I think it will be aerial. I think it will be remote. I think that if you have troops, that they will sit on the border, that they will be in Slovakia. That's unlikely because they're not allowed, that they're very antipathetic to Zelensky currently. They may well sit in Romania and Poland. They will be light forces, nothing like the 100,000 that has been mentioned, and they will be very, very token indeed. And I suspect, as currently being mentioned amongst the Chatterati, the commentators, I think they wouldn't last for more than a few months, if that. It's looking very, very obscure, because while we're hearing a great deal of noise from the White House and from the American side, we're not quite clear. Nobody can be quite clear, even some of those in his inner circle, what Putin's scheme of maneuver is. And it is a scheme of maneuver because it won't be over until it's all over, as the great Yogi Berra was saying. And I think you're right, because I go back to my famous expression of a semi-Fredo war, that we've seen this. We've got semi-Fredo wars, things that seem to be frozen, and then they become unfrozen, and then they freeze a bit. Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, that one isn't resolved. Azerbaijan, Russia, and Iran is another one. And this is where you get a big juggling act. And it's all of a much bigger piece, I think, with Putin. That Putin will be working out, what we do with Ukraine. Ukraine is the big prize. He wants to show that Ukraine is Russian-looking and not Brussels-looking, let alone Washington, not that Washington particularly wants it. But how do you fit Belarus? How do you fit the Kaliningrad isolated garrison into that, Moldova, and even the Balkans, largely, much of the Balkans, and of course very much including Serbia and Montenegro, are part of the Putin sphere of influence and reference.
Absolutely. I mean, Vladimir Putin would take a very old-fashioned view that the edge of Russia's sphere of influence is the north of the Carpathians up to the Baltics, and that land in between is Poland. So you can understand why Poland would be so nervous. I just wonder, Robert, is there any scenario in which, with Putin, with Trump saying that, if they sign this mineral deal, he'll allow Ukraine to fight on, that if, with Friedrich Merz now in charge in Germany, with Macron increasingly hawkish, with Starmer pledging increases in defence spending, albeit probably nowhere near enough, that with European support, Ukraine could go on fighting this war?
I think the objective has got to be, the main objective, the mission for Ukraine, is not necessarily fighting the war, because that's a ways and means, and it is looking increasingly difficult. The end is simply this. It's to maintain its national sovereignty, which, after all, Russia signed up to with Britain and America in 1994 in the Budapest Accord. Whatever you say, that's what it was. Even the sort of a rather plastic Marxist left in the UK, who are now prone to arguing that it was agreed that NATO shouldn't expand its borders. Yes, that was discussed, but it wasn't signed up to. It's the sovereignty. Now, this is going to be this is at the center of the chess game, because Russia will say, yes, you can have sovereignty provided we can have influence, and you don't have influence from the West, e.g. Belarus and Georgia. And that is the way Russia will then work. It will try and erode the independence of Ukraine. This is part of Putinism. Now, it's whether America, Trump America, really cares a fig about Ukrainian sovereignty. And I think that is really open to question. And that is now one of the big questions now. The problem for me is the devaluation of language. And a lot of the rhetoric and exchange, and you get it from Musk and Trump and others, very intelligent men in their ways, but the language is infantile. And the Russians, the Lavrovs, not only Putin, but people like Lavrov, Peskov, the spokesman, really understand that too, and they play it very, very well, because the information offensive since Trump came back to the White House on the 20th of January, the information onslaught from Moscow has been absolutely formidable, as I can speak to from very direct personal experience.
Just finally, Robert, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has now pledged to increase Britain's defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. Is that anywhere near enough? When he meets Donald Trump this week, is Trump going to be in any way impressed by that?
Probably not. But it could be enough if it is incremental, and it could be balanced. And by the way, I think it should be balanced with the aid budget, which I think should be restored. He should pledge that by at least the halfway stage in his parliamentary term, Starmer. I mean, so 2007, we should be heading back to 4%, 5% if the economy is any good, but I doubt it. But because they go hand in hand. This is what is so unfortunate and ridiculous about it. The problem with Britain, medium long term, in an aging society, as most of European and advanced societies are, as I have pointed out continuously, is how on earth you go on spending more and more. We're already looking at over 50% of all public expenditure on health and welfare. But by the midterm, looking to 2030, it could be 60%. That cannot continue, given the shape of society, community and the economy in the UK. And so much is so in quite a bit of the rest of the world. And the real warning signs are coming up from Italy, South Korea and Japan.
Robert, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us again on Frontline.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.